We're learning Maseches Yoma in the Kollel Boiker. Most of the Masechta speaks about, or a lot of the Masechta speaks about Avodas Yom Kippurim. That's in this week's Parsha. A lot of times the Shiur is on what we're learning, Maseches Yoma, the Daf, and sometimes it's on the Parsha. Over here will be on both. A big chilek of the Avodah was the Kohen Gadol going into the Kodesh HaKadoshim 4 times, aside for the Ketores and also for the Zrikas Adam. The Pasuk says in this week's Parsha, Val Yovoi B'chol Eisal HaKodesh. The Seista Rashi explains these 2 Rashis. The Kohen Gadol was only allowed to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim only on Yom Kippur. He couldn't go in at any time, only on Yom Kippur, and only with the Avodas Yom Kippurim, the Hainu the Ketores or the Zrikas Adam. The Mizrahi explains these 2 Rashis, which would seem a little bit repetitive, but he explains that Rashi is coming to say that don't think that you could only not go in, the Hainu, you could only go in Yom Kippur with the Ketores. But maybe with the Zrikas Adam, you could go on other days as well. You could only go on Yom Kippur and only either with the Ketores or with the Zrikas Adam. There's a chiddush that's brought in the name of the Goyen. The Chachmas Adam, the Mechutin of the Goyen brings his Mechutin, the Goyen, that says a chiddush, how he understands the Medrash. It's almost a Mefurish, a Medrash. The Medrash says, Omer Rabbi Yehuda ber Psimoin, Tsar Gadol hoye leMoshe ledavar zeh. This that the Pasuk says, Val Yovei B'chol Eisal HaKodesh, that Aaron HaKohen cannot go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim at all times, only on Yom Kippur. Tsar Gadol hoye leMoshe, that maybe Aaron HaKohen was kind of pushed away from his madrega. Be'etzem, he would have been able to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim all the time. And he was pushed away, now he could only go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim only on Yom Kippur. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu, says the Medrash, Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu leMoshe, not like you think that Aaron HaKohen is not in the madrega. The rest of the Kahanim Gedolim cannot go in, but Aaron HaKohen can go in whenever he wants. In other words, what any Kohen Gadol does to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, Aaron HaKohen can do it not only on Kippur, he can do it any day of the year, as long as he does the same Avodas Yom Kippurim of going in L'fnai L'fnim.
No, specifically trying that he...
For Aaron HaKohen, the Torah says Val Yovei B'chol Eisal HaKodesh, which means what we're learning now, Maseches Yoma, we're going to learn that chilek of the Avodas Yom Kippurim to go L'fnai L'fnim. The Torah Kodshei says in this week's Parsha, it's only for Yom Kippur, and only with the Avodas of the Ketores and the Zrikas Adam. For that, says the Medrash, Aaron HaKohen is an exception, he can go whenever he wants, which is Parshas even a Mefurish, a Medrash, and that the Goyen says Aaron HaKohen is excluded. And with that he explains the Psukim, Ayin Sham, he explains different Psukim throughout the Parsha. He also explains at the end of the Parsha, the last Pasuk in the Parsha, V'hoisa zois lochem, L'chukas olam lechaper al b'nei Yisrael mekol chatesechem achas b'shana. So he explains l'chukas olam. That means for the doiris going forward over there, it's only achas b'shana. Ma'ashe'inkein the Parshas Achrei that was given bizman Aaron HaKohen. So then it wasn't yet achas b'shana. It was every single day of the year. Aaron HaKohen was the Kohen Gadol at the time. He was able to go on whenever he wanted. From Rashi, the Parshas, it's not mashma like that. And I saw Taka in this week's Parsha, in Dorash Moshe, he brings this Goyen, and the Taka says, Rashi is not mashma. Rashi seems to teach that it's across the board. Nobody could go in only on Yom Kippur. And then he explains what the Rambam says the Rambam says a Kohen Gadol cannot go to the Kodesh HaKadoshim only Yom Kippur. So he says that's referring L'doiris. The Rambam is going Lahalacha. Avadi Bizman Aaron HaKohen Avadi could have gone whenever he wanted, but everybody else, every other Kohen Gadol afterwards could only go in only on Yom Kippur. What's Takar Pshat that he's an exception? What's Takar Pshat? If it has to be Dafka Yom Kippur, it's at Kedushas Yom Kippur. So what's Takar the difference? Why is it different? Aaron HaKohen, what's the Pshat? So the Meshech Chochmah explains, and the way he writes, V'nisgalu lanu tamoi. There was a gilui, says the Meshech Chochmah, in the time why Taka Aaron HaKohen was different, that he was able to go in at any time. So he says, L'fi what it's mavur in the Sepurna. The Sepurna says, not over here, but on the pasuk by the Atavas Haneris, so it says Aaron. Frek the Sepurna, why Aaron? And what Aaron, Dafka the Kohen Gadol, any Kohen was able to do it. Says the Sepurna Chiddush, that all the 40 years that Klal Yisrael was in the Midbar, like the pasuk says that there was an Anon, the pasuk, there was an Anon over the Mishkan when Klal Yisrael was in the Midbar. So Memela, this that we have in a regular Yom Kippur, that the Ktoiris, there's an Anon that we had Yom Kippur for 40 years. I says Dr. Saporno, for 40 years. And Memela says the Saporno, that's why Yom Kippur, as we learned already a few times, the Avoida is Kohen Gadol. Even though we saw could be it's a Shaila, maybe only the Avoidis Yom Kippurim, not the regular Avoidis, but Akavan the support is going that all the Avoidis Yom Kippurim is Kohen Gadol, all the Avoidis, even the regular Avoida, is Memela, says the support. No, that's why the Atavas Haneris, the pasuk says Ba'aron. Why Dafka Ba'aron? Because the whole 40 years in the Midbar was as of like Yom Kippur. This is the support. Atkan Divrei HaSaporna. Says the Meshech Chochmah, Alpi Divrei HaSipurnu is Niskalu Lanu Tama. That's the reason why Aaron HaKohen was able to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim any day of the year. Because the 40 years that we were in the Midbar was Yom Kippur, was Ki Yom Kippur. And Yom Kippur you could go in. Samela says the Meshech Chochmah, you're able to go on any day of the year. And Zok the Meshech Chochmah, La'oir this, it wasn't Dafka Aaron HaKohen. In the 40 years at the Midbar, at the end Aaron was Nifter, and Allah took over was the Kohen Gadol, he was also able to go on any day. The Medrash would seem that Moshe Rabbeinu had Chalisha Sadas, Lagabi Aaron, and Aaron, the Abisha said Aaron could go on. But over this, it was a din in the 40 years that a din Yom Kippur, and any Kohen Gadol was able to go in. He also brings the same Yesod, that's why at the end of the Parsha says, because only the 40 years in the Midbar that there was an Anon, so it was like Yom Kippur. But afterwards, Avada, when it's not Yom Kippur every single day of the year, Avada, you can't go in only Yom Kippur. Why Taka was it needed? Was it needed to be able to go in every day? It's Enechanami Taka. It was Yom Kippur, Kedushas Yom Kippur throughout the year. But what was the tzorach to go in? Why was there a tzorach? Explains the Meshech Chochmah. You know why there was a tzorach to go in more often in the Kodesh HaKadoshim during the days in the Midbar? And he says the following. The kapara that came through the Kohen Gadol going lefnai lefnim was on Tumas Migdash v'Kadoshav. The Chatom of Klal Yisrael was the Sar La'azazel, but going in lefnai lefnim, the kapara was Tumas Migdash v'Kadoshav. Says the Meshech Chochmah, it was necessary to have more kapara in the Midbar. Why? Because in the Midbar it was also for Klal Yisrael basar taiva. They were only able to eat basar Kodshim, not basar taiva. And the Mela, Tumas Mikdash v'Kadoshav was more negeya, more applicable in the Midbar than later. So even though throughout the Deiros in the Beis HaMikdash, once a year a kapara on Tumas Mikdash v'Kadoshav was enough, however, in the Mishkan, that there was a lot more basar Kodshim eaten for all of Klal Yisrael. Even in Yisrael, you wanted meat, you brought a shlomim. So if that's how you ate it, it was more olol to be nichshel, chas v'shalom, in tumas mikdash v'kadoshav. That's why it was negeya to have this, call it this extra of being able to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim more often, not just on Yom Kippur. As is like the Meshech Chochmah. After the Chachmas Adam brings the Goyin, his Mechuten, he says, "Ve'efshel lefi this yiki b'meyashev akasha," that the Mishnah Lamelech asks on the Beis Yosef. The Gemara says, "Tan Rabbana." These Yud Aleph Samamonim, we say it's Karbonas before davening, in Pitam Aktoris, Enkel Akenu after davening. Yud Aleph Samamonim, V'mchisar Achas Mikol Samanel Chayiv Misa. So the Beis Yosef has an Arichas speaking about maybe those that don't say it after davening, because even if you just say it and you miss one as Chayiv Misa, the Chaymer Adavar. So the Be'emes, if you look in the Gemara, these more, these Yayin Kafrisen, these Mala Ashan, other Samamonim, says the Beis Yosef, true. However, the other ones are not Ma'akev. The Yud Aleph Samamonim are Ma'akev more than the Yud Aleph are not Ma'akev. This is like the Beis Yosef. Frek the Mishnah Lamelech, the Gemara in Yoma Daf Nun Gimel, the Gemara says clearly a drasha to be marba that Ma'ala Ashan is Ma'akev even the rest of the year. So how does the Beis Yosef say these 11, Ma'ala Ashan is not Ma'akev? It's mefurish in the Gemara with a drasha that Ma'ala Ashan is the gay the whole year. Mefurish. Says the Chachmas Adam to Miyashav this kasha, Al Pi the Goyin. This that the Gemara says that Ma'ala Ashan with a drasha is Ma'akev throughout the year is talking about when the Kohen Gadol goes in throughout the year, the Hainu Aaron HaKohen. Over there, Ma'ala Ashan is Ma'akev. Masha Enkein, what the Beis Yosef is speaking about it, Bechlal, the Ma'ala Ashan of the, not the Yom Kippur to Ma'ala Ashan, that's not Ma'akev. Al pi this Goyin, this chiddush of the Goyin, that the Goyin says that Aaron HaKohen was able to go in whenever he wanted. The Meshech Chochmah in Parshas Tetzaveh, on the pasuk Va'avneit Tase Maise Rekem. So frek the Meshech Chochmah, it should have said V'ha'avneit, the Avneit. He's one Avneit. Va'avneit would say like one out of others. Says the Meshech Chochmah, yes. Al pi this Goyin, besides the Avneit, it's not just the Avneit, the one and only Avneit. There was a special Avneit made for Aaron HaKohen if he wanted to go in any other day of the year. I'm going to leave it on the side for now. Why Taka wasn't necessary? Why couldn't he use the Avneit that he used to go on Yom Kippur? Further with this Goyin, Al pi this Goyin, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky in Emes LeYaakov on this week's Parsha explains, he's mevar, the Gemara in Gittin says, Ches Parshiyos Nemru Boi Beyoim. On the day of the Akamas HaMishkan Rosh Chodesh Nisan, 8 Parshas were said. Shmoyne Parshiyos Nemru Beyoim Shehukam HaMishkan, Eilahem, Parshas Kahanim. One of the 8 Parshas, says the Gemara, is Parshas Achrei Mois. This week's Parsha was said, B'yoyim HaKamas HaMishkan. Frek Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, why was it necessary to get to be taught, it should be ne'emar, it should be said, the Parsha of Achrei Mois. The Parsha of Achrei Mois is only Negeya 6 months later, Yom Kippur. Why is it Negeya that it should be said on Rosh Chodesh Nisan? No. Says Rabbi Yaakov, Al pi the Goyin, that Aaron HaKohen was able to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim whenever he wanted. Not only Yom Kippur, it's Negeah for the 6 months up to Yom Kippur is also Negeah. That's why one of the 8 Parshas that was said, the Yoma, Komas, HaMishkan, and Rosh Chodesh Nisan, was the Parsha of Achrei. This week's Parsha, the Parsha of the Kohen Gadol going L'fnai L'fnim, because it's Negeah. Aaron HaKohen was Negeah right away. It was Negeah the first 6 months as well also. Apidus Goyen, the stipler in Birchas Peretz, the stipler is Mevar a Gemara. The Gemara in Yoma Daf Nun Gimel Amud Aleph, the Gemara says, "V'nosan aktoiris, if it wasn't Ma'ala Ashan, Zok the Gemara Yechayiv Misa." If the Kohen Gadol, when he did the avodas haktoiris l'fnai l'fnim, if it wasn't Ma'ala Ashan, Zok the Gemara is Chayiv Misa. Frek the Gemara, typically he's chayiv even without this, that it wasn't Ma'ala Ashan. Typically he's chayiv because it's a bi'arei kanas. Why is it a bi'arei kanas? Because he went in shalei l'tzorech. If there was no Ma'ala Ashan, so he wasn't yoytze v'avoida. If he wasn't yoytze v'avoida, he went in shalei l'tzorech. So why is it negeah? The Gemara says with a drasha, holam le Ma'ala Ashan yechayiv. If you're not chayiv mitzah, even without the din of, you need to be Ma'ala Ashan. Let's say Ma'ala Ashan wouldn't be ma'akiv mitzah, the din of Ma'ala Ashan. But if you're not Ma'ala Ashan, you didn't do that void. It's a bi'arei kanas. So the Gemara answers. The Gemara says hacha b'mayaskinon, that he did it twice. Once it was Ma'ala Ashan, once without Ma'ala Ashan. So it's not a bi'arei kanas because when he went in it was Ma'ala Ashan. But mitzah, the second one that he did, he was over, and he's chayiv misa for doing an avodah without Ma'ala Ashan. At kana Gemara. Frek the shagas arya, but wait a second. He's chayiv even if he did twice, and even without Ma'ala Ashan. Typically, he's chayiv chorus, which is more chamer than chayiv misa b'dei shamayim. He's chayiv chorus because it's Yom Kippur. And he did havora shalei l'tzorech. As a frek the shagas arya. Just like what the Gemara says, typically it's a bi'arei kanas. Frek the shagas arya, typically Yom Kippur, he did havora shalei l'tzorech. So the stipler in Kilas Yaakov has a shtickle to explain that maybe it's not it's makalkul b'havora, but that's a shayla, a whole hilchas Shabbos dige shmuz. We're not going to go into it now. But Ayin Sham. But Zok the stipler over here, ala Torah, that Lafi the Goyin, that Aaron HaKohen was able to go on any day of the year. Zok the stipler, it's Negeah. It's Negeah, this drasha, if Aaron HaKohen went in a different day, not on Yom Kippur. What's the Shagas Arya's question that typically is over al Tzavara? No, it's talking about that he went in a different day of the year, a weekday, so there's no Avara. So the stipler, Avada, there's no tzad that Aaron HaKohen would be over on the Ratzon Hashem, on the Tzivui Aboirei of being Ma'ala Ashan. But like the stipler says, the Torah says, La mitas hadvorim, that the din is that if Aaron HaKohen was to go in and not be Ma'ala Ashan, that's where the drasha is chayiv misa. Avada l'maisa Aaron HaKohen would have never done it. But that's where it's negayah the drasha for Aaron HaKohen. In this week's parsha, Vaita, the pasuk says, what begodim did the Kohen Gadol wear when he went into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, Kseinas Bad Yilbash? The pasuk goes on and lists out the 4 begodim. Frek the Even Ezra, wait a second, 4 begodim? There's 8 begodim. The Kohen Gadol went in with 8 begodim l'fnai l'fnim. So why does the pasuk says Kseinas Bad Kodesh Yilbash, the Hemshech HaPasuk, the 4 begodim? What happened to the other 4 begodim? Kohen Gadol wore 8 begodim. So for emphas, Alpi, the Pasuk of Parshas Tetzava, when the Pasuk lists out the 8 begadim, so the Pasuk says that the Kohen Gadol wore the Shmoine begadim b'voya l'kodesh. B'voya l'kodesh. Zakta Even Ezra, you know what b'voya l'kodesh means? B'voya l'kodesh means when the Kohen Gadol went l'fnai l'fnim. So the Pasuk already said in Parshas Tetzava that when the Kohen Gadol goes l'fnai l'fnim, he wears the Shmoine begadim. In our Parsha, the Pasuk is just explaining Lagabi the Dalit begadim. It was different Dalit begadim. The 4 regular begadim were different than the Dalit begadim of the whole year. So that's what the Pasuk goes through. It's bad. It was different than when you look back in the regular begadim Parshas Tetzava. But Avada, the other 4 begadim in Parshas Tetzava, when the Torah says B'voya l'kodesh, Zakta Even Ezra, B'voya l'kodesh means to the Kodesh HaKadoshim, which comes out that the Kohen Gadol Taka went in l'fnai l'fnim with the 8 begadim. It's a big shaila, it's a big machlokes, and Taka in Divrei Shol, also al Torah over here, the shaila Meshiv, he asks, he says, I don't understand. What the Even Ezra says that there was 8. The Even Ezra asks, what happened to the other 4 begadim? I don't understand the shaila. The Kohen Gadol only went in with 4 begadim. That's why the Torah Akdosha only lists out 4 begadim. So he says, but al pi de goyin, you can be beyashiv. Lefi de goyin that Aaron HaKohen was able to go in any other time of the year, and then he taka went in with the 8 begadim. I'm going to leave it on the side, just like before. Why taka would be different in Keteger, Shatness, it's a shmuz, but Al Kapanim, then he did go in. So he says, Alpiza, that's what the question of the Even Ezra is. The Even Ezra is asking, what happened to the other 4 begadim? Not on Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur taka, the Kohen Gadol only went in with 4 begadim. But if Aaron HaKohen was to go in any other day of the year into the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he taka wore the Shmoine begadim. Just to be Messiah, we spoke this morning the Avodas Yom Kippurim, to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim with the Kohen Gadol went in, is only in Yom Kippur. We saw the Chiddush of the Goyin up here, Medrash, that it's the Parshas even come out, the Mafurish Medrash, but it's, the Goyin says that Aaron HaKohen was able to go whenever he wanted. To conclude Lahashlama Se'inyan in the Torah's Koyanim in this week's Parsha, it's a few lines long back and forth. The Torah's Koyanim says, Achicha ba'al yavai, to go in al HaKodesh, ve'ein Moshe ba'al yavai. Moshe Rabbeinu does not have the Isser of going into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Then there's a few lines, maybe it's the Bonim, back and forth. I'm just going to say over the Pshat in Asira Se'efer from the Kamarna, Pshat in this Torah's Kehanim, and he explains the following. He says, any Kohen Gadol at any other time, not Yom Kippur, was not able to go in because it's considered a Bi'erei Konos. The Kohen Gadol has no reason to go in at any other time. Yom Kippur, there was a din to do the avodah, so you had to go in for the Ktoros, for the Zrika. Any other time, it was just like a Kohen can't go into the Azara Shleilit Tzorach. He could go in for avodah. He couldn't just go to be there, to Drezach, to hang out. If he went, it was for avodah. The Kohen Gadol going into Kodesh HaKadoshim any other time besides Yom Kippur was a Bi'erei Konos. Obviously, Aaron HaKohen that was able to do the avodah at any time, and Mela wasn't a Bi'erei Konos. But for any Kohen Gadol, it was a Bi'erei Konos. Moshe Rabbeinu, like the Pasuk says, heard the Eibishter speaking to him. These 2 psukim, Harashi says, V'yavi HaKasav HaShlishi, the Eibishter spoke from the Kodesh HaKadoshim, from the Kruvim, And Moshe Rabbeinu was in the Oyel Moed listening. That's how Rashi explains it to Psuk of Yaveh Kasav Ashlishi. The Meila, Pshat is, it's a Chiddush, but Moshe Rabbeinu, just like he went into the Oyel Moed to listen, and the Meila, it wasn't a Bia Reikonis, whether if you want to call that was an avodah for Moshe Rabbeinu, or if it wasn't an avodah, he was a tzorech, he went in to listen to the tzivi, to what the Eibishter was saying. The Meila says, once he went in to listen to the Rabbeinu Shalom, he could have gone into the Kodesh HaKadoshim also. He went into the Oyel Moed. But the Pshat is the reason why any Kohen Gadol can't go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Was he going into the Kodesh HaKadoshim for? It's nothing what to go in. But over here, the reason why Moshe Rabbeinu went into the Mishkan is to listen to what the Eibishter Kavayachol was saying. Is Memela, just like he went into the Oyel Moed, he could have gone into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. That's why Moshe Rabbeinu was able to go in, because it wasn't a Bia Reikonis. So we have what we're learning now throughout the weeks, Avodas Yoma Kippurim, with the Kohen Gadol going in Lefnai Lefnim. We see a Gevaldige Chiddush that Aaron HaKohen wasn't limited to Yom Kippur. He was able to go in any time, any other time, Avada with doing, like the Medrash says, as long as he did the Avodas Kohen Gadol Yom Kippurim. And so too, Moshe Rabbeinu also was able to go in, but not doing the Avodah. He was able to go in whenever he went into the base, to the Mishkan, to the listen to the Eibishter talking. He was able to go into the Kodesh HaKadoshim as well. Have a wonderful day.